Speaking of South China Sea, I think the official Taiwan policy has been the same as mainland China.
Yes,
South China Sea.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting. There are occasional moments when the official policy position, especially when it comes to land, between the PRC and the RRC, exactly the same. Like when it comes to the islands, because there's also islands in the Japanese, the Senkaku Islands, that also Taiwan still claims and China claims.
Yes,
and
yes.
They were also the same, by the way. Taipei and Beijing agreed in the 1950s only on one thing, which is we do not recognize Mongolia as an independent state.
Oh,
until 1964.
I think the Mongolian case was basically forced by Comrade Stalin. When the nationalist government was plagued with the war, and Mao had a very hard negotiation with Stalin regarding the status of Mongolia. By the way, we didn't have time last time we mentioned this, the issue of Mongolian neutrality. But Mao spent 3 months in Moscow.
Right.
At the end of 1949. Have you ever seen any head of state visit to another country for 3 months? No. It was Mao's strong and hard bargaining with Stalin over the status of Manchuria, which Stalin's Russia wanted to keep the naval port and the railroad. Essentially, it's a colonial legacy. But the Stalin believed they won the war. They should have all the goodies. This is the agreement between Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin. Of course, behind the backs of 𝗟𝗘𝗧𝗏. 𝗟𝗘𝗧𝗏 was furious about Mongolia's status. But the national government was in a very weak situation. Even the Manchu government, by the way, this all dating back to the Manchu government. The Manchu government restored Mongolia's status as part of China. But the Bolshevik Revolution actually had played a major role because some of the white Russians fled to Mongolia.
Right.
The Red Army chased them over there. And after defeat them, they decided to stay. So this was actually a violation of Comrade Vladimir Lenin's promise twice that Russia would return all the special privileges to China twice in 1919. So Mongolia has been an interesting case. I would say it was the weakness of the nationalist government and also the Qing dynasty too. The Opium War, everything that started the ball rolling, and then Mao tried to get back. Eventually, it was a compromise. So let's talk about the compromise. The compromise Stalin and Mao made was Stalin would have to give up Soviet control of Manchuria. But in exchange, he wants to keep Mongolia. That's the result of the 3 months of negotiations. And because of that, Stalin started to see Mao not as a genuine communist, but as a nationalist. And that's the roots of the Korean War. Stalin, because the deal with Mao was something he believed against Soviet national interest, because Soviet would lose the naval port at the tip of the Liaodong Peninsula, Lisuan, where the Russians and the Japanese fought in 1905. Soviet Union would have to withdraw it, hand it over to China. Russian, Soviet Pacific Fleet would lose a warm port.
Yes.
Where the Pacific Fleet would anchor itself. At this point, Comrade Kim Il-sung came to Stalin, and he wanted to unify the Korean Peninsula. Stalin always said "niet" to him until this point, because Stalin believed if 𝗓𝗏𝘂𝘁 won the war of unification, Soviet Union would have all the access to all the war naval ports along the Korean Peninsula.
Right.
And would have a reliable Moscow-controlled communist government. Mao was too damned nationalistic. So that was the intro-communist conflict. Actually, it was about national interest, not ideology. And that was, for better or worse, Mongolia was part of it. The war actually, the decision to invade the north that was made between 𝗓𝗏𝘂𝘁 and Stalin on the back of the Chinese. Once the war started, China was briefed. So China was in the dark. And because China's mind was single-mindedness for Taiwan, not the Korean Peninsula, but the outbreak of the Korean War destroyed China's unification and also sowed the seeds of the future China-Russian or Soviet ideological conflict. But I think that's a long story. I don't want to go too much into it.
No,
but I think that Mongolia was a trade-off between Stalin and Mao.
And the interesting thing is that also Chiang Kai-shek never ever agreed to letting Mongolia go, because Chiang Kai-shek was, of course, even more nationalistic than Mao, or like just differently nationalistic.
Yeah.
And
I agree with you, but I have to say that the Chiang Kai-shek's when there was still mainland government, actually reluctantly signed the Treaty of the Friendship with the then Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
They signed it, but the Chiang Kai-shek propaganda to the Chinese people is always, we disagree. So when I was visiting Taiwan in the early 1990s, the first time I was there, I went to the office of the nationalist, the government office of Mongolians, Tibetan, Xinjiang affairs. The map it shows, including Outer Mongolia.
Of course.
I was amused. Was you were more nationalistic than Chinese on mainland, but that's what they are thinking. And of course, they blame the mainland communists of South too. But that's not good. Mao bargained very hard. But essentially, after 3 months of staying in Moscow and back and forth with the Soviet side, and for the first 2 months, Stalin refused to see Mao, to meet him, only passing notes. It's a very difficult negotiation between the two communist leaders. So this is not ideology. This is a pure national interest. Mao act as a Chinese nationalist, for better or worse. I think eventually, ideology, everything seemed to cloud these pictures. But I think down to earth, of course, now both Russia and China would rather keep the status quo.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, of course.
And something that I think rather than rock the boat, and Mongolia too, I think is in a very interesting situation. Develop this notion of third neighbor,
yes,
which essentially it wants to reach out to Japan, Korea. But I think the Moscow and Beijing at this point would rather to keep things as it is.
Yes, and the Mongolians too. I talked to very, very great Mongolian diplomats, and they are very, very aware of their strategic vulnerability, of course, and also of the value of keeping, of not rocking the boat. The dictum this diplomat told me is, a duck is calm when the lake is calm.
Oh.
So that's Mongolia. Mongolia is the duck, so keep the neighborhood calm, you're fine. And they're aware of that, very aware.
Yeah, it has its own mind. Mongolia has so far not officially joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, not yet. Of course, as a dialogue partner, but not official. So it has its own independent mind, which is okay. China could live with it.
Yes.
And the stability of Mongolia is important. And the economic potential of the country is also enormous. Now, Putin's Russia, I think just this time in Moscow, they finalized this project of the second line of the gas line, the power of the Siberian.
Actually going through Mongolia.
Some people on both sides actually question this because they say, well, Mongolia may, one of these days, may do something. Well, I think Mongolia, I think it's the interest of the Mongolians to have stable, peaceful, and prosperous relations with its giant neighbors, for better or worse. You cannot move yourself. You cannot move away from.